Snow fell that night the way forgotten prayers return. Not all at once, not loudly, but with a patience that feels intentional. At first, it dusted the ground, barely enough to matter. Then it thickened, erasing edges, swallowing the road, pressing the mountains into a hush so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath. The kind of silence that makes a man aware of his own heartbeat. Nayati Crower stood outside his cabin with his coat pulled tight around his ribs, watching his breath bloom and vanish into the dark. 30 winters had taught him to endure cold, hunger, and isolation. They had taught him how to fix what broke and how to sleep lightly when storms came. But they had never taught him to belong. He lived alone because solitude asked fewer questions. The land never wondered why he spoke so little. The trees never mistook quiet for weakness. Out here, survival was enough, or at least that was what he told himself when the ache returned, the one that rose in his chest on nights like this, reminding him that endurance and emptiness are not the same thing. The storm pressed harder. Snow clawed at the logs of the cabin. Wind crept through the seams like fingers searching for warmth. Nayati did not know then that the storm had not come to bury him. It had come to deliver him something he had long stopped expecting. He noticed her first as movement. At the edge of the white, something shifted, too deliberate to be wind, too steady to be drifting snow. He narrowed his eyes, breath slowing, instincts sharpening. For a moment, he told himself it was nothing. The mountains played tricks when weather turned cruel. Then the shape moved again. A woman walked alone through the storm. She leaned forward into the wind, not in panic, not in weakness, but with calculation. Each step was chosen, each pause measured. She clutched a small bundle against her chest, wrapped in worn cloth, as though it were the last warm thing left in the world. Nayati felt something stir beneath his ribs, sharp, unfamiliar, unwelcome. Before he could weigh the risk, before he could remember his reasons for staying closed, before he could retreat into silence, his voice escaped him. "Get into my cabin," he called out, the words torn rough by the wind. "It's freezing outside." The sentence hung between them, fragile as glass. The storm seemed to pause, waiting. She stopped. Snow collected on her shoulders as she turned toward him, eyes dark, alert. She studied the distance he kept, the way his hands remained open and empty, the fact that he did not step closer. Her name was Nakomi Red Willow, though he would learn it much later. In that moment, she was only a woman who had learned early that kindness often came disguised as obligation. At 21, she carried herself like someone far older. Her spine stayed straight, her gaze missed nothing. Survival had taught her to count the cost of warmth before accepting it. After a long moment, she nodded once. Not trust, never that. When she crossed the threshold, the door closed behind her with a sound that felt heavier than wood, as if something unseen had sealed itself shut. The cabin was small, shaped by years of wind and silence. Pine smoke lingered in the air. The fire in the hearth cracked softly, alive with its own restless breath. The walls bore the marks of a man who fixed rather than replace. Nakomi stayed near the door at first, her body angled for escape. Nyati turned away to tend the kettle, offering a kind of space that did not demand gratitude. He poured hot coffee into a tin cup and slid it across the table. It was not an offer, not a fever, just a fact. That unsettled her more than the warmth. She wrapped her hands around the cup slowly. Firelight caught the edge of her bundle, and small pieces of metal glimmered faintly beneath the cloth. Earlier that day, the town had reminded her who it believed her to be. She had stood near the saloon, laying out her jewelry on a wooden crate, necklaces and bracelets shaped from broken watch gears, bent springs, discarded fragments of motion others had thrown away. They clinked softly as she arranged them. No one stopped. Eyes slid past her like weather, inconvenient, unavoidable, unworthy of notice. A man laughed without humor and muttered something about girls who sold trinkets to hide their emptiness. Nakomi folded her cloth with steady hands. She refused to let his words decide her worth. Nyati had been there too. Hot pulled low, choosing distance over decency, telling himself it was safer not to be seen. The memory burned now as he watched her sit by his fire. Shame arrived quietly, the way it always does when it comes too late. The storm did not ease, neither did the silence between them. Eventually, Nakomi opened her bundle and began repairing a broken necklace. Her fingers moved with practiced patience, shaping beauty from damage without complaint. She trusted process more than promises. Nyati split wood, then split it again. The rhythm anchored his thoughts. They spoke in fragments, about the cold, about roads that stayed open when others closed, about how winter teaches you what you truly need. Each sentence was tested for weight, ready to be withdrawn if it threatened something fragile. No confessions, no sudden truths, only the growing realization that neither of them was being asked to disappear. Days passed. Snow piled against the windows until the cabin felt like the center of the world. Nakomi stayed not because she was asked, but because the storm insisted and the space allowed it. She swept the floor each morning, not to earn her place, but to. Nyati learned to share his table without counting what he might lose. He watched her hum while she worked, a low sound that filled corners he had forgotten existed. She watched him mend tools with a care that surprised even him. The town faded into memory, its judgment softened by distance and snow. Something inside Nyati loosened, as if a long-held breath were finally being released. At night they sat by the fire, not touching, not avoiding, simply existing in the same quiet. Nakomi spoke once of her mother, of learning to work metal from scraps because scraps were all they ever had. Nyati spoke of horses, of storms, of the relief of a door that closed at night. Their stories did not overlap, but they leaned toward each other. When the storm finally broke, the world emerged sharp and unforgiving in its beauty. Snow glittered beneath a pale sun. The road reappeared like a question waiting to be answered. Nakomi packed her bundle with practiced ease, not rushing, not lingering. Nyati felt the old fear rise, the one that whispered that all warmth ends, that solitude always collects its due. He walked with her toward the road. He did not ask her to stay. Instead, he asked where she wished to go. She stopped, looked at him, really looked. "Here," she said. the words settled between them like a vow neither hurried to name. Spring arrived slowly, as it does in places that remember hardship. Nakomi returned to town with her jewelry, this time with Nyati beside her, not shielding her, not claiming her, simply standing where judgment could see him. The town adjusted the way it always does, slowly, reluctantly, then all at once. Coins began to fall into her hands with less hesitation. They built a workbench by the window. Together they shaped metal and wood, their movements learning each other without instruction. They married quietly near the creek. No spectacle, no audience, only water moving over stone and wind through grass. Years later, when I think of that winter, I remember not the storm, but the door, how it opened, how it stayed open. If there is a lesson here, it is this: dignity is not given, it is built quietly by those who refuse to disappear. And perhaps even now you are standing in the cold, wondering whether to knock, unaware that on the other side a fire is still burning, waiting for someone brave enough to step in.